Cheers, Rockets fans. Welcome to The Locker Line, an exclusive podcast from the home of the Rockets.
Whoa!
Sports Talk 790.
Rockets!
The Locker Line is proudly served to you by Carbox Clutch City Lager.
It is good! Oh, yeah?
Red Nation, get ready. Get ready. The Locker Line starts now.
Welcome aboard.
Welcome back to another new episode of The Lager Line, as always served to you courtesy of Clutch City Lager of Carbach Brewing. I'm Ben Dubose, your host, editor of USA Today's Rockets Wire, and contributor to Sports Talk 790, the official flagship radio station of your Houston Rockets. As always, I'm joined by Paulo Alves, our co-host and producer out of Portugal. You can follow him on Twitter at Paulo Alves NBA, and me on there at Ben Dubose. We're chatting in the early morning hours of Thursday, July 18th. With the Rockets just past the midway point of their 2024 Summer League schedule. They're currently 2-1 with, in all likelihood, just 2 games left to play, the next coming late tonight versus Minnesota. So as far as what we've learned to date, I would say it's something of a mixed bag, but I do think that, just as the record would suggest, the good has largely outweighed the bad. Of all the one-loss teams, when you look at the standings, the Rockets actually have the best point differential at nearly +8 per game. And then as far as individual standouts, I would say the biggest is clearly rookie guard Reed Sheppard. He's averaging about 20 points, 5 assists, 5 rebounds, 3 steals per game, shooting nearly 50% overall, 40% from 3. And let's just be honest, for Summer League as a whole, he's looked like the best rookie in his entire draft class to this point. That's generally been the assessment that I've seen and heard from media members out there that cover not just the Rockets, but the NBA as a whole. With that said, though, there have been some peaks and valleys, and honestly, that's the case with the whole team. Reed was brilliant in the first 2 games, and then in that loss to Detroit, he shot just 6 of 17. It was the same story and then some for Cam Whitmore, who happens to be the most proven player on the Summer League Rockets. Cam was great in those first 2 games. Then against the Pistons, he shot just 1 of 15 and scored only 5 points. Now, to his credit, he did have 5 assists. I thought he generally made okay decisions. Again, he just couldn't buy a shot. Now, in defense of the Rockets, some of the issues in that Detroit game may have been related to logistics. It was the 3rd game in 4 nights. It was day 2 of a back-to-back. And in fact, both of those Sunday and Monday games took place in a span of under 24 hours. And we should also note that this is a time in the NBA calendar that guys are definitely not in regular season shape, which may make some of those back-to-back considerations even more of a factor than they normally are. Not sure why you have to have back-to-backs in Summer League. Actually, I've not seen that before this year, but it is what it is. With that said, though, let's not attribute everything to that, because it could also be that the Pistons made some tactical adjustments after seeing some film of the Rockets in those first 2 games when they destroyed the Lakers and the Wizards. Specifically with Reed, it felt like they were guarding him a lot more physically and closely on the perimeter. They were doing things like traps, intense ball pressure, things of that nature. So that's why I don't want to necessarily attribute all of it to scheduling factors or randomness or bad luck, whatever you want to call it, because it could also be adjustments that other teams making to what they see on film from guys like Cam and Reed, and now the onus is on them to adjust back, assuming they continue to play. So anyway, with that in mind, Paulo, how would you contextualize what we've seen thus far, both in terms of the highs and lows, as well as just trying to make sense of where these guys currently are as we're trying to gauge their potential viability as rotation players for next season?
Yeah, so starting off with Cam, I think we largely saw one of the same. I think we saw less boneheaded drives to the rim. I think he was more of a willing passer. And I also do think that he shied away from the jump shot, perhaps because it wasn't going in. I'm talking both threes and mid-range shots. And he was trying to brute force his way to the rim. It's not that he was making the wrong decision or driving into 5 people. It was more that he had beat his man and he allowed, the defense to help because he didn't take the mid-range shot right away. Rather try to get to the rim and, the percentages speak for themselves, although they're instead heavily influenced by the last game. But I mean, you don't really expect Cam to be a scoring option by just giving him the ball and have him go to work. Although he can do that to some extent, but I think he's, we've thrown out the Jaylen Brown comp a lot. And as a ceiling type of guy. And even Jaylen Brown, you don't just give the ball to Jaylen Brown and let him go to work, or at least he didn't earlier in his career. He's gotten better at it, but he's still not the guy you give the ball to and let him go to work. He's someone who will thrive off of advantages created by the offense itself or by a teammate or in a pinch he can shoot a step back three, or a little bit of a post up game as well. But he's more of a guy who's going to get his within the flow of the offense. So although the efficiency from him hasn't been great, it's been I'm not exactly turned off by his summer league performance thus far. It's been a lot of effort, which we know is the staple of the Rockets now with Ime Udoka. So, which is why I also agree with you that I think the third game being the back end of a back-to-back also really hurt us, because you could tell from the beginning of the game that we just didn't have the same cues that we had in the first two games. And even still, with that, we kept the game close until the fourth quarter where they blew it open. And so it is what it is. It's at the end of it, summer league, so you can't take too many conclusions from the good or the bad. But what everybody wants to really talk about is Reed Sheppard. So I'll just move on to him quickly. I think a lot of people were impressed by the defense. I was impressed by the hands. I was not impressed by the defense as far as staying in front of guys. I think he sometimes is too quick to let the guy get by him and position himself to go for the steal or like to poke the ball out rather than trying to stay in front. I think that's something that will burn him at the NBA level, at least for the first year or so. But it's definitely something that they'll work with him and he'll get better. It reminds me a little bit of something that Fred VanVleet started to do once we started kind of, being suspicious that he might be playing hurt. I don't know if you remember, throughout the season, there was a point where he was hurt for a little bit and then his defense, fell off a cliff.
I remember that at the midpoint of the season, yeah.
Yeah, and I thought with Reed, maybe it was because, he wasn't, maybe it was summer league and he was disengaged, and although I'm not saying he wasn't putting in the effort, I definitely think he was. But it felt like the type of defense that Fred VanVleet was playing at that point in the season. So I think it will take some time for him to get used to just staying in front of guys. And I do think that he plays very good team defense. He's, with some exceptions of some plays that come to mind, usually in the right place to help or to go contest the shot. Or even if he gets blown by, he's still like in the play, even though he's not, walking his guy up. Offensively, what did I see? I was impressed by the mid-range game, like everyone else was. I was impressed by the floater. I'm trying not to get too biased or not to let the last game affected too much, because it really felt like, the first two games, he was taking advantage of the offense for others, and that was opening up spots where the other team was expecting him to pass the ball, and he just rose up for the mid-range shot, and it was money from there. Definitely impressed with it. Definitely see the comparisons that people brought up of Chris Paul. I think the shooting's real. He is only at 39%, but he has a 1-for-7 game, and then in the last game I think he shot 1 3 or something like that. I don't want this to seem negative, but his summer league was so good that my way of adding insight right on the matter is, just so I don't say what everybody else will say. Some things I'll just point out something that I did notice that weren't so good, and I'll let you sing his praises. I'm not saying I'm low on him at all. It's just that I find it easier to contribute by pointing out the things that weren't perfect rather than pointing to the things that were, because I think a lot of people will do that. I thought something that was really obvious in the Pistons game was that he was more hesitant to shoot on screen actions on the perimeter, the threes. I thought there were times where, he was given enough space, and if you watch this film back at Kentucky, he was a bit more confident, and he was taking shots that he didn't in the Pistons game. Maybe he wasn't feeling confident on his shot after having a not so great night the game prior. Maybe he was gassed and a lot of his shots seemed to be falling short. So maybe he didn't have the legs to keep shooting, I guess. He didn't feel comfortable enough, but I definitely thought that there were opportunities that he could have taken to take threes that he didn't. And after that, it snowballed into other areas of his game. This mostly in the last game. And then besides that, I think the only other thing that you can point out that, has margin for improvement, and this is obviously nitpicking, as I said before, at a largely, amazing performance in the first three games, is he sees a lot of the passes, right? But I don't know if it's a technique thing, if he's not strong enough, but it feels like it's not like not loves in the term of
They
throwing
float
the
a
love
little
to
bit.
slip. Yeah,
I know what you're saying. They need a little more velocity. He needs a
exactly.
fastball that has a little more miles per hour on it. Yeah.
For sure. It feels like some of them at the NBA level would get intercepted. And so I think that that's something that he obviously can work on. But, and I guess I'll throw some praise and I'll hand it off to you. Something that I was really impressed by, and that was a glaring difference from this summer league to previous summer leagues. And I guess you can praise the coaching staff as well as Reed, is that it feels completely different to watch the game in previous years where the weakness was clearly at point guard. And even when we had Aman Thompson, he is a point guard, but he's not, a floor general type just yet, right? He's more of he can create it. He is the threat, and he can use the threat to get other guys open. Reed is not exactly he is a threat, right? But he's not exactly the same type of downhill threat. And so it felt like the team was a lot more structured on offense, and the offense was a lot easier to watch versus previous summer league iterations of the Rockets, where it felt like a lot of one-on-one, trying to go get a bucket, trying to brute force things to the rim, or brute force step back threes, or whatever it was, or post moves. Reed has great fluidity. He has great pace. He has something that our other lead guard, Jalen Green, doesn't have or needs to get better at, which is he keeps his dribble alive and within control a lot more easily than Jalen does. If Jalen finds himself in trouble, he'll pick up the ball or he'll fumble it. Reed has, he's a lot craftier with the way that he keeps the ball alive, and that's really helped, through the first 3 games, something that I've noticed as well. And he makes a lot of reads, even though he wasn't executing the passes perfectly. I would go as far as saying that he already sees some stuff that a veteran point guard like Fred VanVleet was not seeing last season. For Fred VanVleet was great for us, obviously, but he was largely making the same plays over and over and over again, and we saw, I think, a lot more variety in the types of looks that Reed was generating and reading and punishing the defense with through the first few games. So I'm really excited to watch him at the NBA level. I hope they don't shut him down. And the fact that he didn't play too great in the last game makes me think that maybe that makes it more likely that he'll play a fourth. Hopefully he does. But yeah, I was really, really impressed. And for a draft where a lot of us expected it to not be that great, I think Reed is. I'm not gonna say I've watched a lot of summer league, but he definitely looks like someone who has the potential to be like a true building block for the future, and not a role player that a lot of people were expecting this draft to be filled with.
Yeah. I think as far as the weaknesses, so defense is something, and I think back to the pod we had with Brian Kalbrowski towards the end of May. Look, he's going to have to make up for some of his shortcomings, specifically with size, with stuff like, obviously, the IQ, the try-hard factors. He's just not going to be an athletically imposing defensive player. And that's okay. He has so many other skills. But I do think that no matter what the IQ is, there is a learning curve to the NBA. And I think we saw that in the third game. The deflections he had in the first 2 games, I mean, those were great. But at some point, when you don't have the NBA experience going up against this quality of athlete, then you're going to get your hand caught in the cookie jar. We saw that happen at the end of quarters. We saw him pick up 5 fouls in the first half. A lot of the things that went his way the first 2 games, it felt like the Pistons saw that on tape and adjusted to it. And I think, that should be a pretty simple fix. It's just he's going to have to learn that there's only so much that he can get away with. And, Fred, in that sense, is the perfect guy for him to learn from, in that we know that's a huge part of Fred's game, whether it's steals, blocks, just being able to get his hands in there and mitigate the lack of size, the lack of elite athleticism on the perimeter. Fred is the perfect guy, I think, to sort of mentor Reed on how to pick his spots as, not a super small guard. Reed actually is a little bit bigger than Fred, I think, but not someone that fits the mold of a quintessential stopper on the perimeter. So I think it's largely to be expected. We knew it based on his athletic profile. We knew it based on the film at Kentucky. in terms of his offense, I actually think there's a specific type of three that he needs to work on, and it's the Steph Curry, the pull-up from 25 feet on the dribble. Because if you look, he gets a lot of separation when he pushes the ball in transition, because even though he didn't have a ton of on-ball reps at Kentucky, you can see that teams do respect him as a floor general, as a passer, and so they play off him a little bit in transition because of his ability to pass, because of also his willingness to take the ball to the bucket, where obviously he has nice touch around the rim, but he's also got a floater game, he's got a mid-range game. So there are opportunities for him to pull up, and he just simply hasn't done that. I think it's because at Kentucky he functioned more off-ball. We saw at times, especially against Detroit, it felt like when they used him in an off-ball capacity, he could get a good mid-range shot whenever he wanted. If he adds the pull-up three the way we saw Steph, and that was sort of the transformative element of his game the first few years, as he went from something of a shooting guard at Davidson to a full-blown point guard in the modern NBA. When Steph really took off was when he got comfortable, doing all the shooting things off the dribble and incorporating it with his abilities as a point guard. And so I think that's something that probably is going to take some time. Again, some of it comes back to his usage patterns or lack thereof at Kentucky, which was influenced by recruiting politics, Reed being a good but not great recruit out of high school. But it is something that, to keep in mind as you go into the NBA, that even if he's a great shooter, well, can he shoot within certain constructs? That's going to be a little bit of a challenge. And so as with any player, even a really, really good prospect like Reed, then there are still things to learn when you're just 20 years old and you've not played in any real NBA games yet. And honestly, even his one season of college came off the bench. So we mentioned all of those just as cautionary tales to not necessarily expect him to be a star level player immediately. It's totally okay if he's not. With that said, the reason I want to sing the guy's praises, we talked throughout the pre-draft process about how to justify a number 3 overall pick. And I think at this point, when he's been the best rookie in his entire class at Summer League, boy, did the Rockets ever get lucky moving up from number 9 or 10 to number 3. People tried to mitigate it at first, saying, oh, it's a weak draft. How much does that really mean? No, it looks like a pretty big deal now, going from whoever you could have picked at 9 or 10 to Reed Sheppard. And throughout the process, when we went back and forth on, is it worth it to take Reed at number 3? And it looks like at this point, the answer is clearly yes. The main question we kept asking was, what value can he add beyond three-point shooting? Because if you just wanted to add shooting, there's other ways that you can add that to your team. And it feels like, other than the Lakers game, and really just the second half of the Lakers game when the Rockets were up by 20-ish points, that felt like the Lakers just sort of hit the quit button, it feels like teams have largely chased him off the three-point line in the half court. Now, there is the asterisk I would put on it is the transition scenario I was describing. When he's pushing the ball with pace, there have been a few opportunities they could pull up from 25 feet that he's not doing. And maybe it's not that he's uncomfortable with that pull-up three. Maybe it's also he's being deferential to more established scorers on the wing, like Cam Whitmore, like Nate Williams. Perhaps there's some of that in there as well. But when he's in the half court, it feels like that teams, one of the Pistons beat writers, I retweeted this during Monday's game, talked about the Pistons guarding him in Summer League the way they guard Steph Curry during the regular season. And in these half court settings, they're playing very physically, very tight on the perimeter. And fortunately, Reed is adjusted by getting to the mid-range shots where he can square his shoulders very quickly. He's had a nice floater game. He's had nice touch around the rim, but he's sort of done that out of necessity because teams are trying to take away the threes in the half court. And so for him to have this impact at Summer League, again, I know there's been peaks and valleys, but the overall stats don't lie. 25 and 5, 3 steals, shooting nearly 50% overall, 40% on threes, when what was believed to be the biggest weapon in his arsenal hasn't even fully been deployed yet, at least in terms of the volume. That is what's really, really encouraging to me, because it shows you there is much more to his game. He can create for others. He can obviously create for himself out of the mid-range with the floaters. The fact that he's not just hitting a lot of threes, because when you get to real NBA games and he's playing alongside top-shelf playmakers like Alfred Şengün, like Fred VanVleet, we know Jalen Green and Amin Thompson can do some creation as well. Of course he's going to get some threes in the half court of real NBA games playing alongside competent players. At Summer League, it's basically Reed, Cam, and not much else. I mean, no one is really expecting, maybe a little bit of Nate Williams, but certainly not AJ Griffin or Orlando Robinson. They've had moments, but certainly not consistent creators by any stretch of the imagination, even in a summer league setting, as opposed to playing alongside real NBA players and a quality team like the Rockets. He's going to get to add those half-court threes to these other aspects of his game. So the fact that he's having this level of impact while not shooting that many threes at volume, to me, it just confirms that he was the right pick, that he is capable of doing these things outside of just being a spot-up shooter. And so when you look at how he's adding value in all these other areas, to me, it just confirms that he was the best player available at 3, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you hit the nail on the head when you said that people doubts were everything else other than the 3, right? And even we right now we are nitpicking on a single type of 3 that we'd like to see him at, but it's more of a, there was so much good that to be unique you have to look at what wasn't so great, because everything notable was going good. And then I think it really was a great point about, other than the shooting, I was not expecting him to be this good of a traditional point guard. He was driving and seeing a lot of passes to the corner, the strong side corner. He was seeing the passes to the weak side corner. He was seeing it. He made some transition, not cross court. Well, some of them cross court, some of them hitting guys in stride. We saw him, get to the rim and do the little wraparound passes to guys that were cutting in. We saw him throwing lobs. We saw him we saw the entire thing. We saw the base. We saw that he wasn't turnover prone. Well, up until the last game where kind of went downhill, where he was trying to force things because the team wasn't doing it. Well, the game wasn't going great. But we saw everything else, and we definitely saw the hand. I mean, his blocks and steals numbers are insane. He has 3 steals a game and over a block a game as a 6'3" guard. So the hands are definitely there. It's from I think it's from the point of view of looking at what he was pre-draft. I think he's knocked it out of the park, by a long margin. It's just, since we've seen so little of him as a Rocket, the expectation has quickly adjusted to, well, this guy's really freaking good. Well, what can he get better at? I think that's the point of view I'm viewing this from.
Okay, and then as far as Cam, I think the numbers don't do him justice. So because he had the 1 of 15 game, the overall shooting percentage is now below 40. He's actually below 10% from 3. So he's averaging nearly 17 points per game, but the efficiency is not there, which, again, is going to happen when one game of your 3-game sample is 1 of 15. If anything, maybe that buys him at least one more game before shutting it down, because I really don't think Cam wants to go into the off-season, into training camp with that, the 1 for 15 clunker being his last showing. It's sort of funny because clearly the plan was for him to exit after 2 games. Jonathan Fagan of the Chronicle actually reported that after the Sunday game against the Wizards, but I think Cam sort of talked his way into playing one more, and then it was a total clunker. So maybe that ends up buying him a 4th game as well, just because I don't think he wants to go into the offseason with that sour taste in his mouth. Time will tell. We'll see what the Rockets do when they play the Timberwolves very late, 10 p.m. tonight, ESPN telecast. But as far as what we've seen from the 3 games, I largely agree with your comments leading off the pod, which is that the numbers don't do it justice because the decision-making has been fine. He's just missed shots. Now, you can argue that was the elite start that he had to his career from 3-point range sustainable? That's a fair question, because when you look under the hood, he's missed some free throws at Summer League. He's actually below 70% on free throws at decent volume. He was below 70% last year in the NBA as well. You combine being an iffy free throw shooter, and then the last, I want to say 20, 25 games, he was a little below 35% from 3. So there is something nagging at me, sort of wondering, hey, we all frame Cam as this very good shooter, but the data pre-NBA was solid, but it wasn't elite. And then after that really hot start, it was okay. It wasn't bad, but it wasn't elite. So with young players, so much of it comes down to the first impression. And Cam, he took the bull by the horns when he got to play as a rookie, especially early on in the year. And when he forcefully made his case for rotation minutes in January and February, he was lights out from 3 for the most part. I felt like he was close to 40% on decent volume, if I recall. but maybe that was a little exaggerated. Not going to draw any firm conclusions based on 3 summer league games or even 5 if he plays the rest of the way. Sample is way too small, and that's something that, again, I'm just sort of keeping in the back of my mind. It's not as if all of a sudden that dramatically transforms his outlook because you look at his body, you look at his athleticism. It's not like he has to be an elite three-point shooter to provide above average value in the NBA. It's just something to keep in mind because I think a lot of Rockets fans framed him as an elite shooter, especially in contrast to Jalen Green, because it felt like in December, January of last year, they played a lot of the same minutes, a similar role, but Cam was shooting much better from 3. Is that necessarily going to be the case long term? That's still an open question. Again, not so much trying to play up that angle based on 3 summer league games, but just tying it into the free throw shooting, how we saw him finish last year. Just keep it in mind as an open question. How good of a shooter is Cam Whitmore? That's going to be a part of his story as he goes into year 2 and beyond. But as far as missing shots, I mean, I'm not that worried about it because I really don't think that he's taking bad shots. This is not like last summer league at times when, of course, he was MVP, so by and large it was good, but there were certainly some moments where he was raw and he looked at 19 years old, what he was last year, one of the youngest guys in this draft class, and a guy who didn't play a ton of college ball. Yes, there were moments of indecision. There were moments where he was way too aggressive, and we saw that early on in the NBA as well. Ime Udoka credited him for developing in those aspects as the year progressed, and I think that's largely held in Summer League. It feels like he's playing within himself. It's not like he's just going rogue, going one-on-one and throwing up wild 22-footers over 1 or 2 guys. No, he's taken clean shots from the flow of the offense. The shots just have not gone in, at least not in Game 3. And even when he shot 1 of 15, he still had 3 assists, or he had 5 assists, And you look at the turnovers, so he's a very high-usage guy at nearly 30 minutes per game, shooting over 15 shots per game. He's only turning it over 1.3 times per game. So it's not like he's making bad decisions or being reckless with the ball. He's passing it. He's not turning it over. The reads seem okay. He's competing defensively. It just comes down to shots aren't going in. And it's not going to be this bad forever, but can he get it back to the level he was at when, especially before the injury? Keep in mind he missed 2 or 3 weeks with a knee injury in March. Time will tell. Again, that's something that it's more of a macro concern than a micro in this pod. It's about, nitpicking the micro of Summer League. The one thing I will say, after throwing out all those caveats for why I'm not too alarmed by the numbers, specifically the efficiency, the subpar shooting, yada, yada, someone that was more down on Cam, and I don't really agree on the reasons this guy was down on Cam, someone on social media who was playing up some of the iffy decisions, someone asked me during Monday's game, is there a scenario where Cam could be in the G League this year? And I believe he phrased it, sometimes people will ask you questions. It's like they have an indication of what they think you're going to respond, but they just want it confirmed. And in this case, I felt like he was expecting me to say, no, that's not going to happen. I told him it's absolutely plausible. And it's could be true with Reed as well, as good as he's looked. One thing that I do think is important to note, and again, this isn't so much because I'm alarmed by these guys playing poorly in Summer League. That's not the case. It's just to remind folks of the context of the roster and an increasingly deep Houston team. It took until after Tari Eason was shut down last season for Cam Whitmore to get into the rotation because Tari is playing at the wings. We know in the modern NBA, it typically comes down to point guards, wings, and bigs. And it wasn't until Tari went out that Cam had a consistent rotation role. And now you have Tari coming back. You're adding Steven Adams to the mix, which means Jabari Smith Jr. is going to be playing when everyone's healthy, almost exclusively as a wing/forward, whatever you want to call it. He's going to be having his minutes come out of that bucket, as opposed to playing largely as a 5, the way he did, especially after the Şengün injury late last season. So you're going to have Eason and Adams eating into the available minutes. You're going to have Reed Sheppard, who looks very ready to play, even though Reed is a rookie and Cam is year 2. They're about the same age. Reed just turned 20 last month, whereas Cam is one of the youngest guys in his entire draft class. So even though Cam has a year more NBA experience in terms of actual age, they're about the same. And the Rockets were able to re-sign Aaron Holiday. We haven't had a pod since the Rockets brought him back, but fortunately they were able to get that done. Solid player, shot nearly 40% from 3, capable defender. He's the type of guy that Ime Udoka can trust. So it's not going to be a given that Cam Whitmore is a rotation player next year. And I don't say that because I'm down on him after Summer League. I just say that because of the surrounding construct of the roster. And so with that in mind, rather than have a guy like Cam or Reed for that matter, we'll see how these guys play in training camp in the preseason. But if you're going to have a guy that's that young in the 11 or 12 spot in your, rotation, your depth chart, however you break it down, basically who's going to play, then I think the Rockets would rather have someone at 20 years old playing for the Vipers than just sitting at the end of the bench and not playing except for mop-up duty. So, again, the asterisk I put on all of this, it's not that I'm saying, wow, I'm down on Cam and saying he could be a G League guy this year because he's shooting below 40% in Summer League and below 10% from three. No, that's small sample size theater. His processing seems fine. Not super alarmed in any way. However, since the question was asked, and I think it's noteworthy that, people are starting these discussions, yeah, there is a world where either or both of these guys, depending on how the rest of the roster shakes out, depending on if there are injuries or if there aren't, minutes aren't going to be guaranteed, and it shouldn't be looked at as a demotion. It should be looked at as an opportunity. Look, if the minutes aren't there at the NBA level, it's better for them to play than to just sort of rot at the end of the bench and not play except for mop-up duty. So not going to predict it yet. I mean, there's a world where both Reed and Cam are rotation players out of the chute, and perhaps injuries play a role as well. But in terms of the possibilities, I don't think Rockets fans should look at it as Cam being beyond the G League. He was last season, particularly when you consider the injuries and the surrounding, construct of that roster. But now that you add Tari Eason, you add Steven Adams, you add Reed Sheppard, you brought back Aaron Holiday, I mean, minutes aren't going to be a given. So the G League, while I wouldn't say it's likely, it's at least plausible, right?
Well, if I had to predict, I think I would I haven't done my it's not traditional. That's not the way that word works in the US. But my yearly, that's not really yearly, but just get to it. The rotation mock-up things that I usually do, I haven't done it with our roster this season, or with the minutes, but my typical expectation going in is that there's a lot less minutes than people think there are. Right. And there's a lot less minutes than I think there are even before doing it, and I'm already expecting there to be less minutes. If I had to bet, I would say neither Reed nor Cam are playing significant minutes the first game of the season.
Ooh, that's spicy. I like that.
It's because of multiple things that you said. First of all, Steven Adams is going to play, and he's going to play at least 16, 18 minutes a game. So Jabari is going to play 30, but he's going to have to play 30 at the power forward. Dylan Brooks is going to play 30, and he's going to play 30 at the 3. Keelan Green is, I think, most definitely going to play 30 at least to start off the season, and he's going to do it at the 2. Fred's going to play 37 at the 1, and then you're going to have Ahmed Thompson take the rest of the minutes at the 1, and some minutes as a wing, as a 3. And then Tari Eason last season averaged 21, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, 22 minutes a game. I expect that, and that was because he had the bone bruise that was lingering, and they were trying to manage it, and there were games that he played more than this, and there were games that he played less than this, but he wasn't going all full throttle. I think he's going to play 30 minutes tonight.
By the way, we should also point out that Jack McVeigh, the guy out of Australia they just signed to a two-way deal, who's supposed to be a really good shooter, he's 28 years old. That's not a developmental guy. That's someone who, like Jayshawn Tate a few years ago, you look at playing immediately if he's going to have a role. So not saying that Jack McVeigh is going to walk in and all of a sudden be a rotation player, but as a guy who can space the floor that seems to have a high IQ, there's a path for him to be in that mix as well.
Exactly. I think unless Reed's like insanely good, which he has been, but in training camp's going to come, preseason games are going to come, I wouldn't be surprised if Aaron Holiday, for the first couple of months of the season, if he's playing well, is the first guy you goes to before Reed in the point guard depth chart.
Yeah. I mean, we should point out that Aaron Holiday is not on a minimum deal. They gave him the biannual exception. That tells you that it's not a flyer, that they actually did want to bring him back. It wasn't just like, oh, we're going to offer him, just a minimum contract, maybe takes it, whatever. No, they actually did value Aaron. You can see that in a 2-year biannual exception deal, second to team option, but still.
Yeah, I can see that. I also think that, and I know you know this as well, I think it's also a bit of his treatable salary.
True.
If they
have a lot of that already, but yeah.
Yeah,
True.
but you can never have too much. And if then second year is non-guaranteed, and if they want to act as a cap space team next year, they won't have access to the biannual exception, if I'm not mistaken. At least it was that way before.
True.
I think the new CBA it is as well. I think that plays a role, but regardless, even if Luka's trying to win, it wouldn't be surprising if he turns to the vet first. Even to stretch it as far as Aaron Holiday, if you have Torrey Smith playing 30 minutes a night, Therese playing 30 minutes a night, Dylan Brooks playing 30 minutes a night, and this is, on the low end, because we know if he's playing well, he may look as going to lean on him even more. That's already 90 minutes at the 3 and the 4. And then Thompson is going to take minutes at the 3 and the 4 as well. The center rotation is locked up, so the front court is really crowded. So I guess the argument would be minutes at the 2 for Cam, maybe, and it's just tough to see, and this is not even factoring in that Jeff Green's there, and Luka really likes Jeff Green. Jeff Green's been great as a vet. Will Jeff Green just play 0 minutes from the get-go? It's not. I think, I don't think it's a slam dunk of a bet, but I would still bet that both of them aren't in the rotation to begin the season. And this doesn't mean that they aren't good enough. It just means that it's a really deep team. And I would also bet a lot of money that within the first 2 months, they will eventually get there, if for nothing else, because injuries are going to happen. And at the beginning of the season, we never take that into consideration. We always think that everybody's going to be healthy 100% of the time. That's not going to happen. Yeah, major injuries are not. I won't even call them major, but guys will miss, 15 to 20 games, and it's not that unusual in the NBA to miss 15 to 20 games, and that's why having depth matters. That being said, I don't know if you have anything else on Reed and Cam. I was going to move on to the lower end guys on the G League.
On the G League or the Summer League?
On the Summer League.
Okay, there we go. Or it could be G League. Yeah, like the two that. When I look at the rest of the roster, the two that stand out, and I'll leave it open-ended for you in case there's guys you want to throw in, but the ones that are more intriguing are AJ Griffin and Orlando Robinson. I mean, you have your 3 two-way guys from last season, Nate Williams, Nate Hinton, and Jermaine Samuels Jr., but I think we largely know who they are. Griffin and Robinson are new. Robinson's had some moments with the Heat. He's been one of the better plus-minus guys in Summer League, averaging about 15 points, 10 rebounds a game, shooting better than 60% from the field. I really like him as a big. He does all the little things well. Like when he sets screens offensively, he's never moving. The fundamentals are so good. He doesn't pick up cheap fouls. He goes vertical defensively. He boxes out. Mentioned he doesn't have the moving screens problem that plagues so many bigs that are thrust into that role as a young player. He's been with the Heat, so we know he's been coached very well. I like him, and the Rockets are better with him on the court, and so I could see him being a consideration, especially if they get him for the Vipers. You mentioned the G League, then I would be very intrigued by that. I'm not sure if I would give him one of the two ways simply because of the way the roster is built and the fact that not only do you have Şengün and Steven Adams as fives only, you also have Jock Landale, who played very well towards the end of last season. He's looked great for Team Australia, absolutely cooked Joel Embiid this week, by the way. And you have Embiid, or you have Landale, under contract for could be 3 more years on a very team-friendly, trade-friendly deal. So you have not only Şengün and Steven Adams, but Jock Landale as well. That's 3 fives only of your most likely 14 regular season standard contracts. And that's before we get into the fact that the Rockets do still want to explore Jabari Smith Jr. at the 5 in select matchups. So would the Rockets use one of their two ways on a 5-only player, or would they use it on guys that have a little more positional versatility, that have more of a pathway to minutes, the way we saw last year, the trio of Nate Williams, Nate Hinton, Jermaine Samuels Jr., who are all still options for those spots this year? That, to me, is a debate. I think Orlando Robinson, you can make a case that he's the most qualified as a player. It's just, in theory, it's not that you give a two-way contract to a guy that you want or expect to play rotation minutes. No, but you at least want there to be a plausible path. And there are so many guys that would have to get hurt or traded, whatever it may be, before a 5-only player could play realistic minutes for the Rockets that I just don't know if it's worth it with Orlando Robinson. You could convince me it would just be a best player available approach and worry about the rest later. I could see it being a scenario where the Rockets want to bring him to training camp. They want to have his rights for the Vipers. But if somebody else around the league sees this run that he's had during Summer League and has more of a clear pathway to minutes at the 5, then that's the team that gives him the two-way. Time will tell. But he's at least made it interesting. I would not have thought going into Summer League that he was a guy that could force his way into the conversation, but his play is strong enough that I think he is. AJ Griffin's been a little underwhelming, but I think when you step back, it's to be expected. He did play better against the Pistons, we should note, overall, averaging 13 points a game, shooting below 40% overall, just above 31% from three. I think while we were both excited about the trade the Rockets made for AJ Griffin, moving a mid-second round pick and a mediocre draft for AJ, who was a near lottery pick a couple of years ago, look, there's a reason he did not play for Quinn Snyder. The defensive concerns are real. And he basically just took a year off. It's like he had a gap year. So there's a lot of rust that he has to knock off as well. So I'm not too alarmed that he hasn't had a great summer league. However, I do think that this should remind you, some of the graphics right after the trade, trying to declare it a core 8. No. That's a little aggressive. It's a core 7. I think Reed Sheppard is someone who can be on the same tier as some of those core 6 prospects in terms of the upside. AJ Griffin, I don't think it's that. That's a little bit more of a reclamation project. You can have some excitement over him. I don't think that all of a sudden he's in jeopardy of not making the roster. No, I think the Rockets understand that there's a lot of rust to knock off, that there's some bad habits that he's got to shake. But I do think that what we've seen to this point, it reminds you why Quinn Snyder, who's a very good coach, decided that he shouldn't play even after a rookie year where he shot the ball very well from 3, nearly 40%, and was a viable rotation player. There are reasons that Quinn Snyder decided that he was not a fit for a Hawks team that wasn't even really trying to contend. It's not that he can't overcome those, but you combine the elements of his game that need work with the rust from not playing for basically a full year, some off-court factors on a personal level as well. I think he had a family tragedy. If you want to Google that, you can learn more about what happened with AJ off the court last year. And there's just some extenuating circumstances. And again, that's not to say that he can't move past them, but I do think that when you consider the totality of it, it's enough to where anyone who was considering him, on par with the core 7 or anywhere close, that was way overcooked. That was too much. AJ Griffin is a good bet. He's a good flyer. He's absolutely a worthwhile investment for a mid-second round pick in a bad draft. I fully support the trade, but he's not someone that I think you should pencil in for rotation minutes or count on as in any way a big part of your future. I think he's a guy that anything he gives you in the big picture is a bonus. To me, that's what stood out about Summer League. I'm not so much down on him. I don't think he's in danger of missing the roster by any means. I think the Rockets will give him a real look. I think they like him, but I just think we've seen enough to where we know why the Hawks made the decisions they did. And so to me, those are the two storylines where I look at the rest of the roster, Orlando Robinson and AJ Griffin. And I think AJ's roster spot is secure. With Orlando, I think he's in the mix, but I think between Orlando, Jack McVay, and then the 3 two-way guys from last year, the 2 Nates and Jermaine Samuels, you're going to have to pick eventually 3 of those 5 for your two-way spots this year. And the guys that you don't pick for the two-way spots, you'll have to risk losing if another team wants to give them a two-way of their own. I think Jack McVay is probably safe in the sense that he is 28 years old. And if you're giving a deal to a 28-year-old who's a professional player, you're probably planning on him having something of a role, maybe not a rotation role, but at least a skill that you expect to be of value to you at the NBA level if you're going through all the trouble to bring him to the NBA, and I'm sure he had other opportunities as well. So my guess is that McVay is at the front of the line for one of those spots. Nate Williams seems to be playing respectively well. in Summer League and was probably the most consistent of the three last year. So if I had to rank those five, I would say McVay is probably the most likely, Nate Williams right after that, and then Orlando Robinson, Nate Henton, and Jermaine Samuels Jr. fighting for that third and final two-way, with whoever doesn't get the two-way sort of in limbo. Do they get a two-way from another team, or are they a consideration for going to the G League with the Rockets, with their affiliate club, the Vipers? Time will tell on that. But those are sort of the storylines for the rest of the roster. What stood out to you, Paolo, as far as those considerations and anyone else that's flashed to you at Summer League?
Yeah, I think I'm with you on it. Jay Griffin, it hasn't been great back at Duke. There were definitely, concerns when he was being projected as top 5 pick. But as far as shot creation goes, he was just a really good shooter with a good athletic profile, with bad knees. And because of that, he was exciting. But he was traded for a mid, I think it was, if not that middle, close to it, second round pick. And my expectations for him are the same ones I would have for a project's second round pick. And I'll establish that second round pick would have been Jamal Shead because he was available. So whoever has the better career will determine if that was a good trade or not. If neither of them have a career, then it doesn't matter. Just because, AJ is 20. Right, he's a third year, going to his third year, but he was one of the youngest prospects in his draft. So yeah, there's that. He was terrible defensively. He didn't shoot the ball well. He had a couple of highlights, but he was another one of the guys that you could clearly tell was limited offensively, but had to, and defensively, but was trying to make it work within the flow of the game. Brought the ball up a couple of times too much for my liking, but that's just because I was biased towards Reed Sheppard. That being said, I guess I'll turn it into the whole game of who would you give the two ways to? And I disagree with you in the sense of, well, first off, I would give it to Nate Williams just because he's a good basketball player. He's a good defender. He's a good hustle guy, and he has a little bit of a back offensively. And there's no reason to not have a guy that good in your G team or as a body in practice. Just because he can give you, he has great length. He can give you trouble. He can give you different type of matchup to other guys in our roster. For Jalen Green to guard or other guys to guard. So I think he brings value just because he's a good basketball player. Then I would actually give it to Orlando Robinson, but I doubt that he'd take it, even if it were a two-way, just because you did touch on it. But there's just no realistic way for him to get any minutes ever on this team. There's three guys that are way better than him that he'll never surpass ahead of him. He's played great in Summer League. He's your typical, rim running, although he's more mobile, defensively than your typical rim runner. He has some shooting upside. He did shoot a couple of threes with Miami. He shot, a couple of threes over 3 games, he shot like 5 threes, whatever. There's some upside there. He has, if I'm not mistaken, 1 more year of G League availability, and that's exactly why if he would take it, I would sign him with with one of the two ways. If for nothing else, because if Reed Sheppard's not going to play with the main team, I would love for him to be the pick and roll partner with him down in the G League, because you can have, we always say that you can pull a 7-foot rim running big out of anywhere, but the truth is, like you said, the fact running screens, having good hands, catching lobs, being able to occasionally run pick and pop, all of those, there's nuances to your stickman type of, rim running, rim protecting big, and Orlando Robinson has a lot of those nuances. And so I think he'd be, not to sound too rude or anything, but he'd be a great tool for Reed to train with in the G League if he does go down there. So I think for that value alone, I would do it. Although I doubt that he'd take it. And then the third two-way spot is already given, and I would highly doubt that they would give it to a 28-year-old, or that the 28-year-old would take it. If there were basically a guarantee.
Right. Yeah, that's what I mean. For him to come over from Australia and do it on a two-way suggests to me that there's an understanding that barring something extraordinary that he's going to have it.
Yeah, for sure. So that's what I would say about the other guys. I'll throw a couple of, honorable mentions. Nate Hinton was a good hustle guy, as he has been, for the time that he's been here. Thank God I didn't have to watch more than a couple of minutes of Trevor Keels. I've had enough trauma with watching him with Paolo Banchero and at Duke. Too much of a ball hog, not good enough of a player to justify it. It was nice to see a couple of U of H guys in Fabian White and Nick Hinton, as I said. And for those who don't know, back when the draft before the rebuild, I think it was 2020, there were two guys that I loved with the pick that we got from the Blazers that we eventually traded away to the Pistons. I like Kyra Lewis, and I really like Jalen Smith, who's with the Blazers now, went to the Suns. So it was, for me, it was cool to see Kyra Lewis wear a Rockets jersey, but, nobody else played significant enough minutes for me to have any take on them. I guess I'll touch on N'Faly Dante because he was, really, really bad.
Yeah, he just looks too raw in terms of being able to move at the level required of an NBA center. Like, if you can't play in space, then the bar is really, really high in terms of your ability to score inside, your rim protection, the things you have to do when you can't defend on the perimeter. The bar is just so tough to clear, and he's just not there yet. It's, largely expected because he's a rookie, but it just feels like, they're starting him, I guess, because they gave him a two-way deal going in. He was something of a prospect, but it just feels like every time they make the flip midway through the first quarter to Orlando Robinson, everything changes because Robinson can move his feet a little bit better. He can shoot from three-point range. There are more elements to his game on both ends, and you can see that it just feels like the entire court, everybody can breathe a little bit easier just because there's way more space.
Yeah, and I'll just leave it off with I may have nightmares, and I've had nightmares since that night. He took a really ugly long mid-range shot. Can you remember?
Yeah, I do.
It was like if you asked, I don't know, let me try and think the guy that I would least expect to shoot. I was gonna go Steven Adams, but I've actually seen some clips from years past where he was, draining threes from the corner. If imagine if Clint Capella was shooting, just inside the line mid-range shot. It was the worst thing ever. I hope I never have to see it again.
Yeah. I mean, he had huge numbers at Oregon, so I understand why he was considered something of a prospect going into the draft. But again, just for that archetype of player, the bar is just so high. It's like a big man version of, I was thinking about this. So there was the report that, who was it? Milwaukee worked out Isaiah Thomas. I was trying to think of the team. And, it feels like Isaiah Thomas has been trying to work out for years. And there's been this story of, well, how can Isaiah Thomas go from being an all-star borderline MVP candidate a couple of years to not even being able to get a job? And the answer is, for that type of player, you have to be at close to the 99th percentile in the things that you're good at. Because as soon as there's any slippage at all, there's just not the diversity. There's too much of a liability in other areas of his game. And it feels like it's sort of the same thing for a big man like Dante. When you can't shoot, you can't space the floor, you can't move your feet well enough to defend in the perimeter or switch, and you're going to be targeted all the time, then the bar is just so high in terms of scoring, rebounding in the more traditional ways for it to offset the liabilities in other areas. And so that's not to say that he can't overcome that with time, but I think when you look at the Rockets, especially for the same reasons that it's not easy for Orlando Robinson to have a path to minutes, it's even less likely for Dante, for a team that already has so many fives only. I sort of have a tough time seeing the Rockets keep him on the two-way going into the season, given the limited pathway and given the work that he still has. I could see them looking at him as a developmental guy if they can have his G League rights and see what happens over the next year or two, but he's someone that's going to need some work. So I doubt that he's a two-way candidate this season. I tend to think that it's going to be three of those other five guys that we listed: Orlando Robinson, Jack McVay, and then the three from last year, with, of course, McVay being at the front of the line simply based on the age considerations that both of us laid out already in bringing him over from Australia. Last point before we close out the pod, Paolo, are you ready to take a victory lap on Khalil Ware, who out in Vegas is averaging basically 20 points and 10 boards a game on better than 50% shooting? Are you victory lapping this yet, man? He has nearly 3 blocks per game too, by the way.
I had one tweet about it, and that's all I'm going to say until I see him do it in the NBA. He might take the role that Orlando Robinson had with the Heat. And since we're doing closing notes, And since we haven't talked about this for a while because, well, there hasn't been a good reason to, I guess the Astros are back? Or we make the playoffs?
Yeah. Well, they're back in the sense of the AL West has allowed them to be back. I mean, it's pretty crazy. 50-46. Now they did go on a 17-4 run to make up for that dreadful start. But even with that 17-4 run, look, 50-46 of the All-Star break is nothing to write home about, but they're in a division that's given them an opportunity that they might not otherwise have. I mean, there were opportunities for the Mariners to bury them, and they didn't. And now all of a sudden, it's made these games. The Astros have 3 in Seattle this weekend. It's something to watch for. I mean, it's the most excited I've been about the Astros since last October. I mean, you're damn right. It's been a while.
Yeah, and I guess if there's something I've learned about baseball is that you never pay the pitchers because they can be good,
breakdown,
and then all of a sudden they're just not good anymore. So if I were a GM, I would never pay pitchers in my life.
Yeah, I mean, the injury risk is there. I'm sure we're losing our basketball listeners as we're wrapping up the pod with this. I think there's so much of an emphasis on velocity that's gotten more important in the last 10 years. A lot of the hitters are talking about it. You know, Jose Altuve a couple of years ago talked about wanting to get back to the hitter he was earlier in his career when he sprayed the ball around the ballpark and wasn't pulling the ball for home runs. Now he's gone to the other extreme, back to where he was a couple of years ago trying to pull. And it's not because he doesn't see the value in hitting for average. No, it's just that with guys throwing harder and harder, then you have to sell out a little bit because otherwise it's impossible to catch up. Well, the consequence of this emphasis on velocity is that if your mechanics are off even a little bit, and obviously Lance McCullers, unfortunately, is a negative example of this, then you're going to get hurt very, very quickly. And so I do wonder what happens with baseball long term, because with guys having to throw this hard, with there being that much of an emphasis in the sport on can you hit not just the mid-90s, but the upper 90s? If you're in the upper 90s, can you get it to triple digits? When you're seeing that much of an emphasis on velocity, how sustainable is that? Your mechanics have to be really, really perfect. And even if your mechanics are very good, as they are with Justin Verlander, we've seen him have some arm issues in recent years. And I know they say the neck issue that he's having right now is not related to the arm, but I'm a little wary of that, considering that Christian Javier had, neck tightness, whatever they called it. Next thing you know, he's having Tommy John surgery. So knock on wood, hopefully the same is not going to happen with Justin Verlander. But yeah, I just think that it's tough to count on pitchers at the rate they're breaking down, not just with the Astros, but all around Major League Baseball. So perhaps it makes it all the more appealing to invest heavily on the offensive side. They've locked up Jordan and Jose Altuve. Perhaps they can do the same with Kyle Tucker, who I know they say he didn't break his shin. Seems pretty clear that he did. At this point, it's going to be 2 months. So come on, there's got to be some sort of hairline fracture in there, I would guess. Whatever the case, look, they're playing relevant baseball. The record isn't where you would want it to be, but at least it's something to tide us over in the 2 months between Summer League and the opening of training camp and the start of Texans season. I was actually dreading what this next couple of months would look like when the Astros had that dreadful start. Like, how in the world are we going to get through this post-Summer League period? And preseason football is awful. At least the Astros are giving us a reason to care. And we'll see if they have enough to sort of get through, because I feel like that, they lost the 2 games to the Rangers right before the All-Star break. I feel like they're running on fumes a little bit. They've, just as much as they underachieved early in the year, they've actually overachieved the last 3 weeks. So they need to get Kyle Tucker back. They need to get Justin Verlander back. Hopefully those guys are not too far away. But at a bare minimum, it's given us something to watch for. And I think that's something to celebrate as we head into the NBA-less period, the dead period of NBA calendar that we know is coming in August and September. Anyway, I think that's where we will wrap things for today. Should note that while we won't go away fully as a pod over that period, depending on whether there's intel, we may do every couple of weeks rather than every week. We will have a schedule reaction show in early August, and we'll have one more Summer League show next week once we see how the Rockets play over these next 2 games, maybe 3. Still a small possibility they could get into the playoffs if they get to 3-1 and have a positive point differential, but a lot to ask there. Need some help elsewhere in the league as well, so I would not count on that. My guess is that there's only 5 games to get into the playoffs. So you get all the way to the championship game, which the Rockets did last year. You can play 6 games, but I think a likely scenario with the Rockets having a loss is that they play just the 5, and then after this 4th game against Minnesota tonight, you have a consolation game basically against someone on Saturday or Sunday, and we'll see if I highly doubt Cam Whitmore as a more established player is there, and we'll see if Reed Sheppard is still playing at that point as well. Time will tell, but whatever happens, we will have a show next week reacting to the last 2 games, slight possibility of 3 of Summer League if they somehow make it to the championship, and then in early August, we'll react to the schedule when it comes out. But then as Rockets content dries up, we might be a little less frequent before, of course, dialing it back up as we get into training camp in late September, then the preseason and the start of the regular season, which should be a very fun one here in Houston come late October. All right, that's where we will wrap it for today. And if you want more content before our next show, which will be the Summer League wrap, the best place to get it is online, where you can follow me on Twitter/X at Ben Dubose and Paolo at Paolo Alves NBA, and this show at The Logger Line, where if you go to the Logger Line's page on Twitter/X, you can find our link tree, which has all the links to our distribution partners like Apple, Google, and Spotify. If you'd be kind enough to subscribe and leave a positive review at your location of choice, of course, we'd greatly appreciate that. Also, on that same link tree, you can find links to our friends, sponsors, and partners of the program, USA Today's Rockets Wire, Carbach Brewing, Swear Soft 790. Hit up those links, and you can enjoy their content as well. So with those plugs complete, we will adjourn for today. For Paolo, I'm Ben. Thanks as always for listening, and please come back soon for another new episode of The Logger Line.